Good Tuesday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on this 19th of November. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope you're having a lovely afternoon and evening wherever you are watching from. As always, you can check your latest weather information, watches, and warnings by calling 1-800-472-0391. That is the Alaska Weather Information Line. It is a free service to Alaskans for Alaskans, and again, that 1-800 number is on 24 hours a day. You can always find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. You'll be greeted with a map of our state, and all over the 49th tonight we have a lot of red, a lot of yellow, and maybe a couple oranges there. All that color simply means that there is some type of weather alert for those areas that we've shaded in. It's an invitation to click that and discover more about the weather that may be occurring where you are, and will help give you safety and planning information that will help keep you and your community safe. As always, if you can't find what you're looking for when you're looking at our website, any of the services there, I'm happy to answer questions any way I possibly can and point you in the right direction so that you're getting the most from your National Weather Service around Alaska. I am privileged to serve you. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me. So let me know, and if nothing else, just send me a picture of some of the new snow you have in your yard. Let's take a look around Alaska. First, let's start with White Pass. A winter weather advisory is posted for travelers going up and down the Klondike Highway tonight over White Pass. We're looking at least a little bit of snow, about 2 to 6 inches of snow is possible in that region again. And the higher you go, the better chance there is, as usual, that winter weather advisory will last through tonight and at least through tomorrow. Right now, rain everywhere else in parts of Southeast. Some of that could be heavy at times, and the National Weather Service folks there in Juneau would like me to let you know that right now flooding is not anticipated in any one part of Southeast, but rivers, creeks, and streams, they'll probably be coming up with at least a moderate to occasionally heavy rainfall that will be working through the area. And it does look like a pretty wet finish to the rest of the week, so kind of get used to what you see there. As we look out towards South Central and southeast parts of South Central, especially the Copper River Valley, winter storm warnings are posted in those areas. Now we're talking about 6 to 8 inches of snow in some parts of the Copper River Valley into the eastern Alaska range. We're talking about 8 to 12 inches of snow. And from Talkeetna all the way up toward Broad Pass, it does look like we could see as much as 4 to 14 inches of snow. It has been snowing there for a while. Folks in Squentna sound like they've had about 5 inches of snow today alone. This was as of mid-afternoon. And 5 inches yesterday too. So it has been snowing, and it will keep snowing. A little bit of yellow shows up here around the Matanuska Valley, and that is for freezing rain. That'll go until about 6 o'clock tonight. We do expect to see that there will be some issues with some freezing rain initially, but any amounts at this point for the Matanuska Valley and points southward. The good news is that should be really light. So those advisories have been dropped for the Anchorage area as well. Now, as we go north through the Alaska Range into the Denali region, into the Deltana and Tanana Flats area, the middle Tanana Valley, all the way up into the upper Yukon, the upper 40-mile country, and the upper Tanana, and all the way up into the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys. Winter weather advisory stretch there, and all the way into the upper Kuskokwim and the middle Kuskokwim Valley. A lot of snow will be falling across the region, but if you're in the yellow area, chances are it'll be from about 2 to 6 inches of snow. The really big concerns look to be blowing snow. So if you're moving over some of the highway passes, you're probably going to see some poor visibility. No surprise, you're in Alaska, you would expect that, but this is your opportunity to plan ahead, travel safely, put an emergency kit in the back of the car, and be prepared for winter driving conditions. It certainly looks like that will be the issue for most of the highway summits there. If you're south of Fairbanks, expect a little less snow, about 1 to 2 inches there for the middle Tanana Valley, but north of town, probably more like 2 to 4. As you get out toward the west, the middle Koyukuk Valley, or the lower Koyukuk Valley, I should say, and all the way down the lower Yukon, it does look like you're still under a winter storm warning, and that should be said for the Kuskokwim Valley as well. In some of those areas, including blizzard conditions, will be possible there. It looks like about 4 to 6 inches of snow for you, but certainly looks like a lot of wind working off the west coast. So poor visibility should be expected in the red shaded areas here across the west coast into Norton Sound. And a little bit further west out toward the Bering Strait, it's a high wind warning and a high surf advisory. That's going to take you all the way through Thursday morning because gusts there out of the east could reach up to about 65 miles per hour. So there's a tremendous amount of wind still moving off the west coast. And on top of that, it is snowing across the interior, parts of Southwest, and the upper interior as well. The good news is that most of what we're seeing in South Central and Southeast for that matter, for the most part, is mostly rain. So plan for wintry conditions here. We are certainly neck deep in it as of this point. Let's take a look at the actual weather that's been happening over the last 24 hours here. You can see low pressure stretching out a little bit across Bristol Bay. Several circulation centers here, but the upper level low is right about here, and that is powering this entire weather system and really in a pretty good position to support its development, support a lot of moisture being pulled into the system, and support the instability it needs to keep some of those heavier bands of rain and even snow going across the interior. You can kind of see this arch shaping up here. That is that leading edge of snow. It has been snowing from parts of the Yukon all the way through the central and western interior and into southwestern Alaska, where we really run into the tap of cold air that's helping that go. You'll also notice kind of these bubbly clouds right here. That's probably the upper level center. And as that is working through, we're going to see another little surge of moisture and probably some additional precipitation that picks up in its intensity as it works through southwest and into the interior as we go through the next 24 to 36 hours. Not ahead of it though, out ahead of the main part of the storm, we have a tremendous amount of moisture working in from south to north. This is connected to the subtropics, so there's plenty to work from here. And that's why we think we're going to watch some periods of moderate to heavy rain across parts of southeast. And like I said, no flooding is expected at this point. But you're probably going to notice the rivers, creeks, and streams coming up a little bit more, and it's certainly adding to the snowfall expected in White Pass tonight and tomorrow. Low pressure across southwest is down to about 965 millibars. It's got an occluded front out ahead of it. It's got warm and wet air back behind it, but that cold air is certainly wrapping into it, and so that's why we draw that purple line in there, as that air is starting to get mixed up a little bit more. The leading wave of warmer air is falling apart as it moves into the interior, but ahead of that, it's prime position to make some really big snow out across the central and eastern interior. Our friends in Fairbanks are getting some of that right now. Tonight's weather shows that low working right up against the southwest coast. It doesn't seem to move much, and because of that, it's really squashed that wind right across the Bering Strait communities and pulling in a lot of that as we go through tonight, tomorrow, and all the way into Thursday morning before it settles down. Again, gusts in the St. Lawrence Island region and the Bering Strait communities all the way almost to Nome could push that 65-mile-an-hour range a little bit, so a high wind warning continues for you. Out across the west, low pressure is working into the chain. There's another wave of that, and you'll notice the initial wave that's working across the Gulf is starting to fall apart. As we get into Wednesday, it kind of regathers itself a little bit more at 997 millibars. It's still tapped into that subtropical moisture, so we've put on 3 dots here, and that means heavy rain is possible across northern, central, and maybe even some southern parts of southeast. That warmer air will move up White Pass, so that freezing level should go up as it moves north and east as well. Low pressure out across southwest, pretty much in the same old spot at 978 millibars. There's plenty of snow falling across Norton Sound, the Seward Peninsula, and all the way into the interior. We will see some breaks, it looks like, north of the Alaska Range as we get into Wednesday and Thursday. Probably going to see some areas of freezing fog with that. It should be cold enough to support that. And the further south you go down the Glen Highway or the parks or the Sterling Highway, you're probably going to run into more rain than snow, except for a few places over the passes where you should expect some mixed precipitation. Out across the west, the weather situation out across the central and western chain seems to be getting a little bit sloppy. A lot of lines there. And what does that mean? Low pressure sitting at around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, about 975 millibars. It's going to keep a lot of that colder air from dropping into the Aleutians, but it will be unsettled. It may be breezy, and it will be wet with clouds and rainfall in the area. As we get into Thursday, you can see that colder air is trying to push southward once again, so we've drawn our cold front in here. Snow continues across parts of southwest. Low pressure really hasn't moved much, but now it's trying to recenter itself just south of the Alaska Peninsula. That's a pretty common thing. At 963 millibars, it's pushing a front through the Gulf. We still have a steady south flow. It's still trying to tap into some of that moisture. The main feed may have shifted to a little bit more over southeast with moderate heavy rainfall still possible in the area, but we still have that connection, so it's still going to rain. Across south central, look for mountain snow. I'm probably seeing some rainfall across lower terrain, and it will be snowing up across the higher elevations there, and wouldn't be surprised to see some snowflakes mixing in with the rain around south central from time to time. Across the north slope, areas of light snow should be expected there, and wind will continue around the Bering Strait. However, the worst of it should start to diminish, and that means a break for places around St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait. A quick check of temperatures for your morning tomorrow. Lower 40s for many in southeast, Sitka 44, Ketchikan and Annette a little bit cooler in the 30s, closer to 40 around the capital city and Yakutat. 30s to about 40 degrees around some parts of Prince William Sound. Valdez will be cooler, and of course blizzard warnings there around Thompson Pass, 35 around Kenai, 36 for Talkeetna, Fairbanks 13, 11 below in Fort Yukon, 5 below for Utqiagvik, and 10 for Nome, with Southwest looking at most areas in the mid to upper 30s. Dillingham and King Salmon will be above freezing, Sandpoint about 43, and Dutch Harbor and Unalaska 38, with a high of about 44 tomorrow. 37 in St. Paul, 29 for Gamble and Savunga, 7 for Utqiagvik. Fairbanks looking at temps in the lower 20s, Ambler and Bettles in the single digits, and Juneau looking at about 45 for your Wednesday.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. IFR concerns will continue out in the west with the next weather system here, and we're still seeing a broad area of very wet air with low visibility and ceilings across the northern Gulf and across west and southwestern parts of Alaska, with marginal conditions across southeast into the interior, with some breaks there noted, especially along and north of the Kobuk and Noatak Valley areas and into the North Slope, and a wide area of marginal conditions across the Chukchi Coast, with IFR trying to sneak back into the western side of Kodiak Island. As we get into the afternoon tomorrow, you can see that band of IFR shaping up across the southern parts of the Bering Sea and across the central and eastern chain, still lingering with a broad area of IFR across the Kuskokwim Delta and even parts of the Yukon Delta into Bethel especially, and out towards St. Paul and St. George. The northern sections of the Gulf still looking at widespread IFR all the way into the Copper River Valley, even the upper Tanana and the 40-mile country and northern parts of southeast, Chilkoot and White Pass, and even approaching Juneau there, looking at IFR throughout the day. Marginal concerns for areas central and south, and again, marginal concerns for many areas across the interior, west coast, and Nome. So we get into Thursday morning, IFR is kind of stretching out here and spreading out into parts of southwest and combining with what was coming in from the west. You'll notice IFR over Kodiak into Homer, creeping up Cook Inlet, parts of King Salmon, Dillingham, all the way to the southwest Capes. Bethel still under IFR. And then IFR lingering around Chilkoot and White Pass down toward Juneau and the inside passage, also around Yakutat and just about to Cordova there, but mainly over higher terrain, the upper Tanana Valley and the upper Yukon and Point Barrow, as well as Utqiagvik all the way down toward Wainwright and parts of the Chukchi Coast looking at IFR. As we get into the afternoon, that whole mass is shifting eastward into the northern Gulf, with southwest, large part of the Alaska Range, southern sections of Cook Inlet, all looking at IFR. It looks like a little area of IFR around Utqiagvik eastward to not quite Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. And then around Gamble and Savunga, we'll be watching for IFR sliding eastward through the Bering Strait. Just about everywhere else across the state for Thursday afternoon will have some level of marginal, if not IFR, concerns. Your pass conditions on Wednesday look like this. Anaktuvik and Edigan Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions holding through most of the day. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will lean over toward IFR concerns as we get into the afternoon. Rainy Pass holding at marginal levels through most of the day, as well as Windy Pass and Isabel Pass looking at MVFR through most of your Wednesday. Mentasta Pass at this point looks like a good call is going to be for IFR, really. It's going to be right there on the edge, but right now it looks like leaning a little bit more toward the IFR level. Tonita Pass looking at marginal most of the day. Portage Pass expected to be instrument flight rule all day long on Wednesday, but primarily for the slop coming out of the sound and not so much a whole lot of trouble right over the pass itself. Chilkoot and White Pass looking at marginal toward IFR as the day goes on, and then likely sticking there for your Thursday too. Freezing levels right now show the surface freezing line sitting up around Makoriak, Nunivak Island, north of St. Matthew, all the way across the Alaska Range, but dipping just south toward Talkeetna and lifting eastward out toward Gulfkana, and then kind of snaking around across the boundary range and into British Columbia. Above that, though, is that warm and wet area we've been dealing with for weeks now, and as this has been sliding into southwest and into south central, that's giving us that freezing rain threat that we keep talking about. Not so much of a concern for southeast, where levels there are around 4 to 6, even 8,000 feet as you approach Haida Gwaii. As well as icing potential goes for Wednesday, though some of that should be improving, as it looks like we're going to lean toward a better opportunity of snow as we get into Wednesday night and maybe onward into Friday for South Central. Right now, above 6 to 5, maybe 5,000 feet there for some considerable moderate icing potential. Down below that, the threat for that freezing rain seems to be easing off just a little bit. 6 to 9,000 feet across southeast, there is some considerable moderate icing potential there, as well as areas around the Brooks Range and parts of the Yukon Valley above 5,000 feet. Widespread areas, though, of isolated moderate. The jet stream right now has a main trough right across the west coast of Alaska, and speeds coming off that Pacific jet anywhere from 110 to 150 knots, and then a huge ridge pushing that southerly flow right into the Gulf Coast of Alaska and then a trough across the west coast of North America. Underneath that means a broad southerly flow that's moving pretty quickly, 25 to about 50 knots coming off the Gulf, and northeasterly winds working their way through the Bering Strait and off the Chukchi coast, 20 to 30 in most cases. Strong southerlies across southeast, 50 to 55 here. At 3,000 feet, you can see the winds blowing just about the same there from the south and southeast, 40 to 50 knots, 30 to 50 knots across the Gulf Coast, south and westerlies into Bristol Bay, and strong northeasterlies coming through the Bering Strait again and off the northwestern coast. So what about turbulence? Well, we know it's there. Widespread, considerable, moderate, all the way around the Gulf Coast, all the way up into southwest, and hit and miss across the Bering Strait. The red areas indicate chances for isolated severe across parts of southwest, the Alaska Range, and parts of southeastern Alaska, most of that below 4,000 to 6,000 feet.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy and these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things, coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the northern lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the northern lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling, you know. It's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job. That was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter. My goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, oh, you're elevated, levitating, you're lifted up. Your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, you know, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just, you know, spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything. So you got to remember that, you know, luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your sea ice edge now. A lot of new ice here across Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound, all the way down into the YK Delta there. It does look like we have concentrations that are greater than 80% for many locations here across the West Coast. It is moving very quickly out to the west and out of Kotzebue Sound. One thing that's a little surprising with this is the amount of wind that we're contending with. Usually not a great situation to build some ice, but there's also an awful lot of colder air moving off. So as those temperatures cool off right on the surface, there's going to be some new ice, and we do expect that trend to continue, at least for the next several days. One notable exception, though, is the Chukchi. It's just wide, wide open. Here's a look at southeast now. As we get into your Wednesday, a southern wind coming up about 30 to 35 knots along the outer coast should be expected. 15 to 19 foot seas all the way from Dixon Entrance up to Yakutat. You'll notice on the inside passage 25 to 35 knots there. Some gusts will be picking up as we get into Wednesday night, and into Thursday. I think you'll really notice it. 6 to 7 foot seas for the most part, 5 foot seas in Clarence Strait. As we get into Thursday, there are the gusts I was looking for. Gust to 45 across the Lynn Canal, 30 knots and 6 foot seas, 7 foot seas as you head down through Stevens Passage, past Petersburg and into Clarence Strait. Across the outer coast, still looking for about 30 to 40 knots there from mostly the south. Some smaller winds here as you get south of Sitka and south of Port Alexander, but you're still looking at 20-foot seas for the most part across the outer coast on Thursday. Pretty rough stuff. Prince William Sound looking at southeasterlies, 20 knots and 4 foot seas, 14 to 15, even 17 foot seas across the north and western Gulf. There's a lot of unsettled weather out there. Take it easy if you got to be out. Southeasterlies across the Barrens there, 30 knots and 10 foot seas, and looking at 20 knots and 5 foot seas across northern parts of Cook Inlet for Wednesday. For Thursday, southeasterlies 35 to 40 for the most part, still looking at 17-foot seas. Southeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 35 with 9-foot seas there, and 20 to 40 knot winds across Cook Inlet. Still looking for a pretty strong wind from the southeast over the Barrens at 40 knots with a 10-foot sea for Thursday. For the western Gulf into Kodiak Island, anywhere from 30 to 35 knots there. You're going to see substantially higher seas south of Kodiak Island. Closer to the coast, though, is what we're talking about here. 22 to 25 footers there across the north and western Gulf, 30 knots. 35 knots from the south with 12-foot seas inside of Shelikof, and southwesterlies right here across the Bering. 30 to 35, 12 to 14-foot seas on Wednesday. That comes down sharply on Thursday. Still looking at 20-knot winds, but the seas improved 4 to 5 feet. You're looking at about 8-foot seas inside of Shelikof on Thursday, and anywhere from 17 to 20-foot seas there across the north and western Gulf. Some of that getting a little closer to land, but a lot of that right next to the coast shouldn't quite be that bad. This is an average again of this general area for each number. As we look at the Aleutians, look for a strong southwesterly flow out west, 30 to 35, anywhere from 14 to 15 foot seas, 13 to 21 foot seas across the region. You're looking at 14 to 21 foot seas, generally south of the chain, 12 to 13 foot seas there across the central and eastern parts of the Bering. Notice that strong northeasterly flow coming in behind all of this low pressure. That angles in a little bit more from the north on Thursday. Northwesterlies across the central and western parts of the islands, and north and westerlies for the central and eastern zones. Anywhere from 19 to 23 foot seas, the strongest of which still feeding into the western Gulf, and you're getting 20 to 25 across the Bering, 9 to 13 foot seas there in the region on that 20 to 25 knot wind. Here's where a lot of the wind's going to be. Out across here across the west coast, notice the ice building in. Okay, that's good news. Anywhere from 30 to 40 knots, northerlies off of St. Lawrence Island over St. Matthew, northwesterlies over St. Paul and St. George, 30 knots with a 14-foot sea, and 16-footers around St. Lawrence Island on Wednesday. So you get into Thursday, some improvement. Not 100%, but some improvement. 20 to 35 knots, 8 to 13 foot seas. There's 17-foot seas that are on St. Matthew, 9-foot seas for St. Paul and St. George, and that north and easterly wind still cutting in around 15 to 20 knots. It's going to be cold. For the Beaufort Seacoast, 20 to 25 over the ice until you get to Utqiagvik, and that ice is slowly wrapping around, but not quite. 4 to 5 foot seas across the Chukchi, northeasterlies coming down through the Bering Strait, 30 to 40 with 16-foot seas again around the Bering Strait. That diminishes ever so slightly on Thursday, 13 to 14-foot seas in the area with a 35 to 40 knot wind, and northeasterlies 20 to 25 across the Beaufort Seacoast. Recapping tonight's weather, there's a lot of winter weather advisories and warnings, even a few blizzard warnings out there for parts of Southwest and the Thompson Pass region. The warnings across South Central have been lifted for the most part, but for the interior, it's going to snow and there's going to be some wind. Plan on accumulating snow and poor visibility, especially if you're driving over mountain passes, including White Pass, where a winter weather advisory is in effect. Will continue to be unsettled and windy through Thursday. Be safe.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.